Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is episode 3 of the Strawberry Hill podcast. Before we get started, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, share our stuff to the Strawberry Hill podcast. Today's a special episode. It's one of my favorites. We have Ryan Maybee, the king of bourbons, like what I call him around here in KC, and then Randy, which is the big fan of bourbon and a member of the Shop Cigar Lounge. Yes. So welcome in, both of you guys.
Thanks.
Yeah, this is super exciting, man. I know today we're going to be talking about Rieger and your story.
Yeah.
And just kind of how you got into it. But first, before we get started, we have to definitely try some.
You got to have a pour.
Yeah, I know. So let's just start off with just a regular J. Rieger.
Kansas City whiskey.
Kansas City whiskey. The Kansas City whiskey. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to pour some, and I don't know how much you guys want. I'll let you pour your own stuff.
Sure.
And we are also smoking the Rieger Reserve, which you can only find here at the shop, and it is a badass cigar aged in a Rieger rye barrel. So we have Rieger everything here, and it's awesome to see. Tell me about who is Ryan, my friend. Like, how did you, I guess, are you from this area?
Yeah, I grew up in Kansas City on the Missouri side up north, kind of like north of Parkville. But yeah, I've lived my whole life here in Kansas City.
So how did you get into, I guess, the industry?
Funny thing is I've never done anything else. I mean, when I turned 16 years old, I wanted a car and my dad said, get a job. And my first real job was as a busser in a restaurant up north in a hotel. And honestly, as crazy as it sounds, I've never done anything else. I just, I guess I gravitated to the hospitality industry just naturally.
And so where was your first place that you worked at?
Well, the first place I worked at was the Ramada Hotel, which is no longer there anymore. And for a few years, like between the ages of like 16 and 20 or so, I, through the end of high school and kind of figuring out after high school, I was working at hotels. So I worked at the Embassy Suites up there for a while. And then I ended up at the On the Border restaurant on Berry Road,
Just living everywhere.
Yeah. Kind of bounce around and it was at On the Border, actually, maybe at the hotel, where at the hotel I did room service for years at the Embassy Suites. And that was just crazy. Like, room service in a hotel is just a wild, wild job. But it was the bartender there that I'm like, I want to do that. It was always, I think in pretty much any restaurant you work at, the bartender, at least back then, we're talking, late 90s, had made the most money and seemed to have the most fun and all that. So I just wanted to be a bartender.
So you went from being a bartender. How long did you bartend before because I know you opened up Manifesto. That was that like your first baby?
No, actually it wasn't.
Okay. Yeah. Let's go back. Yeah.
My first real bartending gig was at Pierpont's at Union Station. Beautiful restaurant, and I was there for the grand opening of Union Station, in 1999, which just happens to be on today. October 30th, 1999.
There we go. That's the date we're talking about.
Almost. That's part of it.
Okay.
This day gets even a little bit more special. We'll get to that. But Union Station reopened on October 30th, 1999. And I was there at Pierpont's, for the grand reopening. And it was, it was just a really special experience. And I think at the time I was 21, and I don't think I really realized the gravity of where I was working and what I was doing. I was by far the youngest bartender. I was the only one that was 21. Everyone else was like 10 years older than me or more, had, a lot of experience in the industry, knew a lot about scotch and cigars and, port and all this different stuff. And I didn't know anything. I was very green, just doing, the like waiting tables on the Border or whatever. But I loved it. I immediately took to it. I loved the job, and I ended up working there for 5 years. It was a really great experience. And that's where I decided that, like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my career.
Yeah.
Like, I want to own my own restaurant. I want to own my own bar. And, I just kind of committed to that. And my first, baby, if you will, was JP Wine Bar and Coffee House in in the crossroads of downtown Kansas City. So like 16th and Walnut. I opened that on May 5th, 2006. So that was it was before the Sprint Center. It was before Power and Light District, all that. And so we were really early, like getting into the crossroads. And I immediately just fell in love with that neighborhood and everything. And I kind of had this idea for Manifesto in the back of my head that whole time. Kind of bringing back and celebrating classic cocktails. I kind of had an infatuation with the, Prohibition era speakeasies, the whole thing. And so it was a few years later that I was able to do Manifesto. So
you did Manifesto. How long was that open for?
Well, we opened in 2009, April of 2009, and then the official closing was during COVID in 2020. So it made it about 11 plus years. Yeah, 11 plus years.
And then above the Manifesto was the Riegar.
The Riegar, which we opened the Riegar about a year and a half after Manifesto. A lot of people that remember those two being together just assume that the Riegar restaurant came first. Because I was main floor, street facing. Bigger space, and then maybe I added Manifesto later, but it was flip flop.
Yeah,
it was the other way around.
Yeah. And I went in there, and it was awesome.
And can we park there for a second? Because I remember hearing some of the stories. The Sazerac story at Pierpont's, which opened your eyes to cocktails, and then you spent a lot of time. And I'd love to hear that story. And then you spent a lot of time in New York, and you really brought back that speakeasy feel. I remember hearing stories of walking by dumpsters and feeling like you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, and that's when the experience began. And can you touch base a little bit on both of those topics?
Yeah, I kind of already had a fascination with history and specifically Kansas City history, and Kansas City has a really really fascinating history and connection with Prohibition. That's just really really cool. Tied into jazz and the whole Pendergast era and Harry Truman, all this stuff. Like there's so many layers of that story. So I already kind of had this fascination with that time period. But it was in New York in 2005, actually. So like I was out in New York researching wine bars, because I was getting ready to open up JP's, and I was recommended to go to this bar called Milk and Honey in 05. And
sounds like a cool spot.
Oh man, like. I'm not kidding when I say life-changing. I mean, it was a life-changing experience going into Milk and Honey for the first time. And, I was referred to it by a friend who said, here's the phone number. You have to send a text message, to get in and everything. I'm like, well, that's weird, but texted the number the day of. You can't, make a reservation or anything like that. They responded and said, we'll have a spot for you at 11 o'clock tonight. Like, I didn't even get to pick what time. They were like, just be here, And it was in this is in 2005, and it's in the Lower East Side of New York. And so that neighborhood is not bustling with, bars and entertainment. It was a neighborhood, and it was very dark, a little bit scary. At the time, a little uncertain about where I was going, what I was doing. And, it felt very out of place, and I didn't really know what to expect, but we found it, and it was just a powerful experience from the moment that they opened the unmarked door to welcoming us in, and the flickering candlelight and the smell of all the fresh ingredients used in the cocktails, to the attention to detail from the hospitality to the drinks themselves. I mean, I was already into cocktails. I was already a bartender, but that took my comprehension of what a cocktail can be to a whole new level that I had not experienced before. And it really turned it into truly an art form, and started to appear more like, the level of skill and craft that a really amazing world-renowned chef takes with his food. So, that was a very eye-opening experience. Milk and Honey really changed everything. And I immediately, I came back here to KC, and I want to open a place like that. I was already in the process of doing JP's, but that's when kind of, the idea for Manifesto began in my head, and kept going back. I went back to New York a lot, and I still do. I still love that city. And you always find something new and something inspiring. And I ended up becoming friends with the owner of Milk and Honey, and we kept in touch over the years. And it was just really moving.
Can we? You talked about really truly the art of craft, the art of mixing cocktails and making cocktails. And I think it's very poetic with when you were, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but some of the stories that I've either read or heard, you're at Pierpont's, you see a Sazerac on a menu, you make what you think is a Sazerac, you don't like it.
Yeah.
But then you got to experience it at Milk and Honey the way it should be made.
Yeah, so the way that
talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so what happened there? So Pierpont's was actually pretty far ahead of its time.
Yeah.
In 1999, the guy that was kind of like behind the bar concept was named Ron Barkley, older gentleman who had already been very established in Kansas City, been a restaurateur for decades, and he was just a really gracious, like hospitable, brilliant man who sort of, he kind of dreamed up the concept of the bar at Pierpont's. And we did have, in 1999, a classic cocktail menu that was supposed to be our happy hour menu. Mm-hmm. And it had a bunch of these old drinks on the menu that were, not all that well known. So beyond just a Manhattan and an old fashioned and all that, but I mean, had a long list of all these like classic drinks. And, the unfortunate thing is like the idea was there, but the real training on how to make those drinks the right way didn't exist at the time, and we didn't learn it. And so once we opened, while that was like an offered thing that we put out as like part of our concept, nobody really ordered those drinks. I mean, we're talking about the height of the Cosmo craze and the Appletinis, and so like I was making hundreds.
The Sex and the City influence.
For real. I mean, and that is, we're talking 1999, like that's what everybody drank. So it was either like big, bright, fruity, sweet martinis, or it was scotch on the rocks. You know what I mean? Like it was, and there was really nothing else in between. So while I had heard the name Sazerac and I saw it, nobody ever asked for it. Nobody ever drank it, and I was never really shown how to properly make it. I did try to educate myself as much as possible. I tried to get some books and read up on it and all that and learn how to make those drinks differently. And I eventually did get, I want to say it was in 2002 when it first came out, was Dale DeGroff's Craft of the Cocktail. Mm-hmm. And that was the first real eye-opener as far as like using fresh juices and that kind of thing. Yeah. Really, game-changing, industry-changing book right at the right time. But the first time that I ever made a Sazerac, not only did I not have exactly the right ingredients, so kind of had to improvise with the ingredients, but I just didn't have an understanding of the actual technique and method behind properly stirring and using good quality ice. And a Sazerac is a detailed cocktail. Like it's all about technique, and that first one that I'll never forget, the first one I ever made and tasted, it was awful. I poured it down the drain. I mean, it was really offensively bad, but years later when I went to Milk and Honey for the first time, I asked for a Sazerac because by then I had learned a little bit about, okay, these guys know what they're doing. Like I know if I'm going to get a good one anywhere, it's going to be here. Mm-hmm. And it was just beyond perfect. It was elegant. And the irony is that it was essentially using the same ingredients, just properly with proper measurements and the right technique. And it was amazing.
I don't think a lot of people do Sazeracs around here.
Oh, what's interesting is that today there are definitely a lot of bartenders out there today here in Kansas City and everywhere that they get it. They know if you ask for a Sazerac, they know what to do. Yeah. And they can make you a good one for sure.
The next time I'm out, I'm going to have to
I want to try
test it out. Yeah,
for sure.
So along the lines of you get into the cocktails and stuff, I know you have a cool story about like the smoked drinks. Mm-hmm. And I don't think a lot of people know about that. Do you mind sharing? I know you're like on the spotlight. But.
Yeah. So the smoked drink thing. I mean, it's become a really, really big thing, right? Mm-hmm. Like everybody in the world smokes cocktails. I mean, you see it in multiple formats, and it's used around the world in competitions. You got the big bell thing that unveils the smoke. But so when I opened Manifesto in 2009, I, again, really inspired by Milk and Honey and a few other places in New York that had opened in between those times. They were, just taking things to the next level. So I knew that we had to do that at Manifesto. It couldn't just be the, text message, hidden entry kind of thing. You got to like deliver at the end too. You got to have the whole package and have the really great cocktails. And so spent a lot of time, reading, studying, asking questions, learning as much as I could. And I knew that one of the drinks that I wanted to do would be a celebration of Kansas City barbecue in some way or another. Right.
Cheers. To
and
that. Yeah.
So I started, there was a guy in New York, who worked at an old restaurant I don't believe is there anymore. His name was Eben Freeman, and worked at a place called Taylor, and he was smoking Coca-Cola for a cocktail, right? But he was doing it in a way where he was like pouring it into a sheet pan and putting it in a smoker, right, and letting the smoke, just like you would smoke a side of ribs or something, right? And so I started experimenting with that concept. I wanted to smoke whiskey in particular, and so I played around with that, and I found that it did work. It did infuse some of the smoke flavor and aroma into the whiskey, but it took hours, and the whiskey got hot, and I think there was probably evaporation, and it just wasn't an efficient thing. So I'm thinking to myself, there's got to be a better, faster, more efficient way to infuse the smoke flavor and aroma that I want into the whiskey. And so I found online a company called Polyscience that at the time was making these like innovative chef's tools. Like one of them you might have heard of is called an anti-griddle, where instead of a heated griddle, it's like sub-zero, right? And so they had another device called the smoking gun, that they had a chef using it they'd put wood chips in the bowl. It looks like a little handgun, kind of, with a battery and a fan attached on the inside. And he would, apply a flame, with a lighter to the wood chips, and it would out of the barrel would shoot this smoke, and he would spray the smoke over a side of salmon or vegetables, and instantly smoke the food. And I'm like, well, that might be something there. So I ordered one.
Yeah.
And I got it, and I'm playing around with it, and I'm thinking it's working, but I'm like, I wonder if I can attach a hose and literally pump the smoke down into the liquid. So I went to the hardware store and I got a hose, and I attached it to the barrel of the smoking gun, and I took the bottles of whiskey and dumped it into a Chateau milk jug with a wider opening.
Oh, that's cool.
Ran the hose down into the liquid and started pumping the smoke through the whiskey, and it's bubbling and smokes. It's creating this thick cloud over the top of it, which I thought was really cool. And it took 3 to 5 minutes, and I capped it and I let the smoke sit there and waited, a few more minutes for it to dissipate, and then tasted it, and I was just blown away. I'm like, oh my God, that's
awesome.
it. And so it worked. And so I started doing that.
First try you got it?
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. I mean, minor tweaks after that as far as timing and all that. But yeah, I mean, the concept was proven. I knew it worked, and so I put a drink on the menu, created an old fashioned, originally using 4 Roses bourbon, grade B maple syrup, a little bit of Cynar, which is an Amaro from Italy, made from artichokes. So a little bit of Cynar.
It's the most delicious drink in the world.
And then just applewood smoked bourbon, and it was just an old fashioned, but substituting in maple instead of sugar, and adding a little bit of Amaro, and still using bitters, using Peychaud's bitters, and called it the Smoke and Choke. And put it on the menu. And so when we were getting ready to open Manifesto, I was walking our team through all of the drinks that were on the opening menu and doing training and everything. And the first time that I demonstrated that process for my opening bar team, one guy, he was just very curious, and he goes, "Where did you learn how to do that?" And I said, "I just figured it out." And he goes, "So you haven't seen anyone do that before?" I'm like, "No." He goes, "I think we need to document it." And so he was kind of an aspiring photographer, videographer. And so he did this video of me, demonstrating how to infuse smoke into the whiskey in this process. And it was shot on the back dock, of the Riegar, right at the entrance of Manifesto.
I've seen this video.
And put it up on YouTube, and it's still there to this day. And I'm really glad he did it, because years later, Gaz Regan wrote a book where he was identifying the most influential and innovative bartenders around the world that were kind of, elevating the craft cocktail industry. And he credited me with being the first one to ever, use that technique to smoke cocktails. And I guess I never really thought about it, but, because that video is on YouTube. It's dated and it's got the timestamp on it.
You know, when I think of Kansas City, I think right now there's so much talk about speakeasies. We've got a really good speakeasy culture here in Kansas City. I mean, which dates back to Pendergast, of course. I don't know what other cities are like, but you know, I mean, Kansas City. Listen, we've got the guy that brought speakeasies to Kansas City. We've got now smoked cocktails, which are popular all over the globe. I mean, you've been very. I mean, we know you definitely as Jay Riegers, but there's this whole other scene in the cocktail world that I don't know how many people are really aware of. That you've been able to really shape and mold and influence. And so to that, I say thank you, my friend.
Cheers,
and,
man.
thanks.
You've
I
got
appreciate it.
And influence in Kansas City.
I think when they write the history on cocktails, I think just like Dave Pickerel is with whiskey and bourbon, I think that your name's going to be synonymous with some of the great things that have happened. And it's just awesome to be able to hear some of these stories. And Smoke and Choke, one of our members here, loves.
I
Smoke
still
and
have a
Choke.
bottle of it. That's oh my! It was so good.
Yeah,
like even your bottle of just the old fashions. I mean, like I can't find anything better.
Well, no, I mean, it's funny. I think how far the whole cocktail, thing has come. Whereas back then, when I opened Manifesto in 2009, and there were just a handful of other bars like that around the country that were doing what we were doing.
Which is crazy,
we actually we actually
up.
sort of all made this kind of excuse. We're like, hey, it's okay if your drink takes a little bit longer.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the whole slow food movement. It's like slow drink movement. Like we were actually justifying the fact that your drink is, handcrafted using fresh ingredients, and it might just take a few extra minutes. And that was okay. But the reality of it was it's kind of not okay. There's really no excuse for a drink taking 10, 15, 20 minutes. Like you've got to be able to, if that movement in the quality of cocktails is actually going to have any staying power, and if it's going to, really, if it's going to be integrated into the whole industry, it has to be accessible. Yeah. Not every bar that does good drinks can be hidden, in a speakeasy concept. Like you need places that are big, high volume, fast-paced bars to be able to crank out good drinks too, for everyone to like really appreciate it. And so now that's what we're seeing. Now we're seeing, a higher level of quality in cocktails across the board and being done at massive volumes. You see it at stadiums, we see bottled cocktails, like you're saying, like that quality of a cocktail is now you can buy in a whole bottle, just pour it over ice and it's ready to go. Like we've really come a long way over the last 10 or 15 years.
That's awesome. So you get Manifesto, get the smoked drink. You started the Rieger Hotel, right? That was what it was called, Rieger Hotel.
We called it the Rieger Hotel Grill and Exchange.
Gotcha.
And I made it that long, kind of convoluted name on purpose, just for fun. But we always kind of knew it would be shortened to just the Rieger, and that's what everyone started to call it. It was just the Rieger.
So you said your dream was to open up something like the Manifesto. Then it grew to the Rieger. But then how do you get from that to now J. Rieger whiskey, which is one of the best whiskeys around? Like how did that transition happen?
Well, that's really complicated, and kind of an accident. It was never my intention.
Accident or fate?
Fate for sure. A little bit of accident, a little bit of luck, a lot of fate. It's just not. It's interesting how I was so obsessed with the idea of Manifesto, and I knew every single detail of what I wanted to look like and feel like and sound like and all those things. Like, it was such a clear vision, yet I was as caught off guard by the distillery side of it as much as anyone else was. Everything just sort of snowballed, and a big reason for that is being in that building. I mean, if Manifesto were located somewhere else, there's a good chance that none of this happens.
Yeah.
Right. But being in the basement of the old Rieger Hotel, and then getting
that big portrait on the side, that was there, right? Or mural?
No, it was gone. I found an old picture. That's how I discovered the history of J. Rieger and Company, because I was digging into
the silhouette, right?
Yeah, I was standing outside. Well, so we took over the first floor of the old hotel building, the lobby, and we were working on opening a restaurant there. And the only thing that I knew about the building at that time was that it had once been a hotel. It was called the Rieger Hotel. That's all I knew. Had the old original logo in the floor, the tile, had Rieger carved into the top of the building on the front, but I didn't know anything beyond that. I didn't know what the significance of the name was or where it came from or anything else. And, I guess, being kind of, again, fascinated with that historical aspect of Kansas City and Prohibition era, the timing of all this. I wanted to know more about the building, and I wanted to, I remember clearly telling my business partner when we were working on the Rieger restaurant, we're talking about the concept, right? And all we knew was it was this old hotel building. And so we're trying to figure out, like, what is the concept? What is the Rieger? And I remember saying to him, this building has a story to tell. It has a soul. Yeah. And I don't know what it is, but that's what we got to figure out. And I want to celebrate the history of this building. I very specifically remember having that conversation with him. And so it was through, like, digging through old records and everything. And, I was outside in the parking lot one day and looking at the south wall of the building and thinking about, like, where the sign would go for the restaurant, like what kind of sign, where it would be placed on the building. And I must have walked by that south wall 1,000 times at that point, multiple times every day for over a year. Yeah. And never noticed until that moment, as I'm staring at a blank brick wall, that there's a faint outline of what used to be a mural. And I can make out what it is very clearly a bottle. It was just the outline, though. It was just the outline of a bottle. Mm-hmm. And as I looked closer over to the left, I could see lettering. And it looked like the letters SKE, and I'm like, holy shit, like, was there a whiskey advertisement? Like, I'm thinking, okay, there was clearly an old whiskey bottle mural here. Like, how cool is that? The idea that it was a Rieger whiskey never occurred to me. I was thinking, because I'm thinking of the time period, I'm thinking, 1915 up through the, the 1940s and 50s. I'm like, it could have been Seagram's. It could have been Old Crow. It could have been anything, right? But I go and I start specifically looking for photographs of the south side of the building from back then. And I found one, and it was J. Rieger and Company Monogram Whiskey.
That's awesome.
And that was, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up.
A new chapter begins.
Yeah, these are like, got to do something else now.
Yep. It was as instantaneous as that.
So you saw that, and you're like, hey, it was just like I need to get into bourbon. Is that something that you've always wanted to do?
No. So I knew.
Sorry, I know we keep, like, talking, and you're not.
Oh, that's okay. No, it wasn't that. Like, it was, I immediately needed to know more about what J. Rieger and Company was, how far back the distillery dated, all that stuff. So, started going down that rabbit hole and finding other photographs and all the old bottles and the historical advertisements. And I found a collector who had a ton of this stuff out in Alma, Kansas, who was able to share his collection with me, and then just putting the pieces of the puzzle together. It was like old, whiskey archaeology. It wasn't as instant as like, okay, now I have to make a bourbon. Yeah. It was, I wanted to know the story, And
then at that point, would you say that when you started doing that research, the soul of Rieger really began to shine through?
Yeah, of course, because at that point,
they were like, what, 20%? They produce 20% of the whiskey in the U.S.?
Oh, I don't know about that, but it ended up, we know that we were the largest mail order whiskey house in the U.S. We were shipping all over the country.
That was back then?
Back then, yeah, like prior to Prohibition.
I'll take 2 bottles, please. Send it to New York.
So when we opened the Rieger restaurant on December 20th, 2010, I had already gathered quite a bit of information and photographs and old bottles, and had stuff framed and up on the wall in the bar area. So when you walked in the front door, it was right there. Some of the old bottles were on the back bar, and that's what I was talking about with, like, sharing the story. I definitely had this bug in me to, like, want to bring back the distillery, resurrect the whiskey. I did not have a clear vision about the path at the time, like where, how, all that. But I definitely wanted to resurrect it. But it was on that opening night that I met Andy Rieger, the great grandson of Jacob Rieger, the founder. So he came in on opening night.
So you talked to him, and then are you saying just like, hey, we got to create this. Like,
yeah, he came in. So he was living in Dallas at the time, and he was up here for the holidays and heard about what we were doing and wanted to check it out, and really wanted nothing more than to say, hey, this is really cool. He came back like 3 nights in a row, like that whole weekend right before Christmas. And it was the second or third night he comes in, he brought me some more photographs because he saw like what I had on the wall in the bar.
That's cool.
You know, and he brought me some photographs. Like one of them I know is of his great grandmother, like in her wedding gown that I hung on the wall there in the bar area. And so he just wanted to be supportive. But I did tell him, like right then, I said, you and I are going to be business partners. We need to bring back your family's distillery. So like it was, again, you know, that it's fate.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's
awesome.
so interesting because I'm thinking, man, if somebody were to try to resurrect my family's name, like, what would that be like?
Yeah.
And so for him to come in with open arms and, well, would you say it was open arms or was there any arm twisting that had to be done?
No, he didn't. He definitely didn't agree. He had no desire to do it initially. It was me kind of pushing it. And after that first weekend of opening the restaurant and meeting Andy, we didn't actually talk for about a year. So he went back to Dallas. I kept, starting a new restaurant, like that's a handful on its own. But continuing as much as I could to learn more about the Rieger family, the Rieger name, the old whiskey, all that stuff. It was a year later that I called him again about a year later and said, hey, I'd like to, discuss this with you. And that was in, around Christmas of 2011, actually. He came back to Kansas City and we had lunch on Christmas Eve, 2011. And I made him a formal proposal. Said, I want you to be a part of this.
Was this a part of the distillery or just a part of the restaurant?
Nothing to do with the restaurant. It would have been. So it always was intended to be a separate business.
Okay.
So how did I guess? So you talk to Andy. You guys want to do this, and then I guess how do you know exactly what kind of whiskey, bourbon you wanted to make?
You don't. And
I didn't know if you had the mash bill from before.
So there's none of that. Those records existed because prior to Prohibition, there was no legislation, there were no regulations, no policies, no procedures or permits or licenses. None of that stuff, right? Yeah. So there was very little documentation. Andy didn't have any documentation about what the family was making. I couldn't find any. The only thing we had to go off of were bottles and labels, which also didn't have any legal meaning back then. Yeah. It was really quite literally the Wild West. So it took a lot of additional research to try and figure out what we were making and could we resurrect that. Now we could have just simply done a bourbon. Yeah. That would have been the easy path for us to do a bourbon, put it under the Rieger name, and move on. Excuse me. But I really wanted to try and figure out what J. Rieger and Company was, and it was through that process of, obsessively digging into that history that we eventually came to what we have today in the Kansas City whiskey.
So how did you find that building? That is the perfect building.
Where we are right now in Electric Park, the Heim.
Yeah.
Another, kind of crazy story.
It's you like those. You like those areas because Manifesto was started where there was really nothing in Kansas City,
right?
And then you look out there and you see Electric Park, and nothing was
in the
out
East
there.
Bottoms. I mean, I lived my entire life in Kansas City, and I'm like, where the hell is the East Bottoms?
I didn't know you guys existed. I didn't know East Bottoms existed.
Right,
until
no one
you
does.
guys got there.
I was somewhat familiar with Knuckleheads. I'm like, oh, okay, so Knuckleheads.
I think that was the only thing I was
how do you get there, right?
Yeah.
So it was weird. We already had Dave Pickerel on board. He was a partner at that point. So we were working on the formulation of the Kansas City whiskey.
Which that in itself, for those.
Pick was the master distiller at Maker's Mark for 14 years.
Yeah.
And then left Maker's Mark in 2009. Yeah. I mean, world-renowned guy. And then left in 2009 to start his own consulting company where he became the primary consultant for any startup distillery that happened, in the 2010s. And this is at a time when craft whiskey is booming, right? So he created Whistle Pig. He created Hill Rock. He resurrected the old Mount Vernon estate distillery where George Washington made his whiskeys. He consulted for Nelson Greenbrier and for St. Augustine Distillery, and the list just goes on and on and on. And I knew him, and we were friends, and so we were already kind of talking about him helping us out. So he came on early in the very beginning, and so Bick was already like part of our team. And so we were working on a space that I wanted to be in the crossroads. I wanted it to be close to the Rieger Hotel, wanted to be close to Manifesto. I lived there, you know. I really like, you know, that idea of having everything close together. We actually did find a building in the crossroads that we were very, very close to signing a lease on it. And it fit everything we needed, like the size that we thought we needed, all the, you know, all the like utility, you know, requirements to start distillation and all that, loading dock, you know, that kind of thing. So it kind of checked all those boxes, but we hadn't quite signed the lease yet. We were very close. And then one night at the Rieger, John McDonald walks in, and John was the founder and CEO of Boulevard Brewing Company, right? And John just comes up to me and he goes, "Hey, I heard you're going to start making some whiskey." And I just kind of laughed. I'm like, "Well, where'd you hear that?" You know, so it wasn't really like out yet, but we sat down and we talked for like 3 hours. And after many scotches, he convinced me to not sign that lease. He said, "Just wait. I have a building that I think will be perfect for you. It's in the East Bottoms. And I just want you to come take a look at it." I'm like, "Yeah, man, absolutely." I mean, I called Andy Rieger immediately, and I was like, "John McDonald wants us to look at this building." Andy was still living in Dallas.
Yeah.
And, you know, when someone like John, you know, is willing to help, you know, you want to listen to someone like that. You know, he knows what he's talking about. So I went down there, and I was kind of blown away by that warehouse, you know. It was about double the size of the one we were going to sign the lease on, and it was way less expensive. Now, it was in a location that wasn't ideal in my mind, but, you know, we figured in the beginning, we weren't going to be a destination for tours, and we weren't going to have a bar in the very beginning. We weren't going to have a tasting room. Like, we just wanted to make whiskey and make booze and put it out in the market and start building the brand. And so it really didn't matter at the time where it was, aside from my own desire to be able to walk there, you know. But we ended up doing that. We ended up going that route and signing a lease on that building with John. And the rest is history. I mean, it just happened to be located right next to that really beautiful.
Did John own the building?
He owned all of it, yeah.
And did he know the history of that building in Rieger?
Yeah, John, you know, John really has an appreciation for all this stuff as well, the history. And I think that's why he was so quick to gravitate towards what we were doing and want to help.
What was the significance of that building in the old Rieger? So that way everyone can understand that.
Well, it would have had very little significance to do with the original Rieger distillery, but it was actually a brewery, the Heim Brewery. It was their bottling plant. During the same time that J. Rieger was blowing up in the West Bottoms, Heim Brewery was blowing up in the East Bottoms and became one of the top 50 largest producing beer breweries in the United States. Like, it was a massively successful business. So that building that we're in now was just their bottling plant. You know, like, not even their brewery production, but just the bottling plant. They own that whole area down there. They had their own dedicated fire station, and they built Electric Park, the, you know, amusement park that was adjacent to it. They built their own streetcar. They financed building their own streetcar to bring people down there.
That's cool.
You know, so it was a very, very successful endeavor back then, you know, between the 1880s and Prohibition. And just like J. Rieger and Company, you know, went out of business immediately in 1919 with Prohibition.
And you guys have a beautiful spot now. Like,
it
is one of the best distilleries I've been to. And I've been to like Buffalo Trace, Spinkers, Woodford, all the ones in, you know, Louisville.
There's something for everybody. The Hey Club.
And it's like the one
Electric
that
Park.
we have here locally is just, it's awesome.
Yeah, man, we need to keep telling people that. I mean,
You guys need to go check it out.
We're getting great crowds down there. I mean, it's really amazing, but we are still very much a destination, and we're a tourist destination, you know. But I appreciate you saying that, because I mean, we put so much, you know, time and energy and resources into building that thing, because we know, like, we're not in downtown. We're not, you know, we can't rely on foot traffic to just, you know, impulsively pop in. Like, people need to make it a point to go down there, and so we need to build something really big and extravagant, you know, to draw people in. And took a little bit of a cue from the Heim family and the, the crazy stuff that they did, 120 or so years ago. We we're kind of doing the same thing now.
Well, I think I've had my birthday party down there twice. Probably go back down this year again, so you'll be seeing more of me.
Yeah,
I know Randy's. We went down there for the Fred Minnick thing, which we'll get into. So
my wife loves that place too, and
it's
it
awesome.
literally is something for everybody. You've got basically you have the Monogram Lounge, Electric Park, the Hey Club,
and then the actual distillery,
and the tasting rooms. We do have
the tasting room. That's
we
right.
have 4 bars on site. One big one outside, the Electric Park Garden Bar, which is amazing and beautiful. The Hey Club is very much like Manifesto. So even though Manifesto isn't around today, if you need that, Manifesto fix, come to the Hey Club.
Yeah.
It's very much inspired by Manifesto. And then Monogram Lounge, big open air, fun gathering spot, full menu, food and everything. So there's definitely something for everybody.
We need to add a shop down there.
I wouldn't mind having a cigar shop. Down
my
there for
first
sure.
one of my first old fashions, at least one of my first, I'll say, premier upscale old fashions was there at the Hey Club. There for an event shortly after you guys opened, and the first time I'd ever seen those big square cubes.
Yeah,
and then they bring out the brass stamp set on it. And you get the J. Rieger Monogram logo right there on top of the cube. And you talk about an experience. That was 2010, 2011. And it's still a memory to this day of that. This is what a cocktail experience should be like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So how long did it take to make this bad boy right here?
It depends on how you look at it.
I guess the first mash bill that you got perfected. And then...
Well, so here's the thing about the Kansas City whiskey, and it's complicated. It's more complicated than it's way more complicated than a straight bourbon or a straight rye. I can't tell you a mash bill on it because there's multiple mash bills, right? So it's a blend. It's a marriage of different whiskeys blended together. The formulation of it from the moment that Andy and I said, yeah, let's do this. And the day that we released it, which was 9 years ago today, on October 30th, 2014. So we are officially, as of right now, 9 years old.
That is,
and we share an anniversary with an anniversary with Union Station, which is ironic,
cool,
right?
Oh wow!
Well, I'm glad to have you on your anniversary.
Right.
Boys and girls, this is what fate looks like.
Yeah.
It took 2 years for us to formulate this. It would have been a lot faster and like I said, a lot easier to just do a bourbon, but we really wanted to try and be true to the history of the brand. And the more I studied about that and the more I learned about that, the more I learned just how vast the world of American whiskey was prior to Prohibition. Like, it wasn't just bourbon.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just bourbon and rye. Like, there were all these other types of things happening, blends and rectification in different ways and all this stuff. So it was quite a puzzle that we had to put together and figure out. That's why I refer to it as like whiskey archaeology, But once we did formulate it took 2 years to figure it out. What we ended up doing is a blend of 3 different whiskeys. So it's a blend of straight bourbon, straight rye, and light corn whiskey. And light corn whiskey is a specific category all by itself that not a lot of people know of, because you just don't see a lot of bottles of light corn whiskey on the on the shelf. It's kind of a blending agent, but really nice. Same mash bill as bourbon, but it just has a couple little things that are a little bit different. It makes it a little softer and sweeter. And then the final component, what really sets it apart, is the addition of sherry. So we discovered that use of sherry in rectification of American whiskey was very commonplace, starting in the 1850s, 1860s, and then growing in popularity up into the early 1900s. And we were importing sherry at the time. And so that was something that I think was the trigger, for me, that said, this is what we want to do, and put that blend together. And so I ended up traveling to Spain, and sourcing the sherry. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Jerez de la Frontera. It's a very specific region in the southwesternmost point of Spain, where that's the only place in the world that sherry can be produced. Cannot be made anywhere else.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And so we source it directly from there, and we only add 2% of a specific sherry. It's a 15-year Oloroso that we add to our whiskey, and that's it. I mean, that's what makes it special. What makes it really different, and also speaks to the history of not only J. Rieger, but to the history of American whiskey.
Yeah. Oh, and I think you got like the right tagline to it, like "Oh, so good."
Oh, so good.
Well, that's part of the. We try to resurrect the brand as true to the original as possible. All that stuff was part of our original marketing, so we didn't have to reinvent that. It was already there.
Now, are you still doing the seminars where you're doing the blending seminars?
Constantly, yeah. I just gave that one in. When was the last time? I gave one here in Kansas City a few weeks ago. I did one in Nashville at their whiskey conference like a month ago. So yeah, I mean, the best way to like really educate people on what is in the bottle, I can explain it the way that I just did, but to really see it is extrapolating all those ingredients and saying, here's light corn whiskey, here's bourbon, here's rye. Taste them all, smell them all, see the difference, and now taste them all blended together, right, without sherry, to see this is the process that I went through when we were formulating it, right? And now taste it with sherry to see that evolution of how it came about. So it's a real, peek behind the curtain and very transparent look at how we make this.
You guys got Nathan on board too.
Oh yeah,
pretty awesome.
Yeah, Nathan Perry, our master distiller, he was employee number one. He started with us on January 1st, 2015. So like after we released the Kansas City whiskey. So when Andy and I, launched the KC whiskey 9 years ago today, we didn't have any employees. It was just the two of us, and we were begging our friends and family for free labor. Volunteer. Hey, come in.
Sounds like what I do here.
Yeah, we'll pour you some beers. And man, the first few months were wild.
So I'm gonna pour some of this bourbon. So let's talk about the bourbon. So this is like pretty new-ish to the market, right?
Yeah, I think we first released it in late 21, I think, or maybe early spring of 22. I have to double check. But this is the stuff that we started making as early as we could. We started distillation of our own whiskey in May of 2015. That's when we finally got the stills built, put together, and began, our process in our distillery and started laying down barrels in 2015. And we knew from the beginning we were committed to waiting a minimum of 4 years. We were not even going to consider releasing a whiskey that was younger than 4 years old. We're not messing around with any small barrels or trying to, manipulate the aging process or speed it up or anything. We're like it's, good whiskey takes time. It takes patience. And so we committed to that from the beginning, knowing that we would, during those 4 or 5 plus years, we would focus on Kansas City whiskey until ours was ready to go. And yeah, we ended up waiting 6 years. I mean, we started looking at it 4 years, but we didn't feel it was ready. And so now it's 6 years old. And so it's a limited release, relatively limited. I mean, it's pretty widely available. But there's a cap on like how much we can make. But it's bottled in bond, straight bourbon, 100 proof, 6 years old, and it's wonderful and delicious. And this is a whiskey that Dave Pickerel had his hands in. He was mentoring Nathan from the beginning and helping us, determine the mash bill. The mash bill is 56 corn, 30% rye, 14% malted barley. Pick was a part of all of that.
Don't anyone take that recipe.
And I think that's important to really set on for a little bit, the fact that Dave Pickerel had his hands on this, because unfortunately he did pass away. November 1st, 2018. 18. So
yeah, unfortunately, that'll be 5 years here in a couple of days.
Yeah. And so this, history and legacy lives on, and he's been so instrumental, with Rieger, and then with so many other distilleries across the nation that, this is special. This is special.
Very special. So how many states and countries and so on and so on? Yeah, we gotta get your accolades out there.
Yeah, so we have grown pretty big, pretty fast.
Good.
It's been a little bit head spinning, and yeah, wow. I mean, we went from thinking about 9 years ago today, just me and Andy in that warehouse, that empty, felt like an empty warehouse that would take us a lifetime to fill up, is now grown into just something just wild, wildly beyond my craziest expectations. But we now have 120 employees. We are distributed in 27
to 120, huh?
Yeah. 27 states nationally. Most recently, we just added the state of Washington just a few months ago. And we're also in Denmark, France, and Nova Scotia, with UK, Spain, Greece, and a couple of others pending.
Awesome. I was going to say, is Spain excited to have you come because of the connection?
I hope so. I think so. In Spain, the biggest spirit is gin. Like, gin is just huge in Spain. But I do think that if we can get our whiskey in there and effectively tell that story of the addition of sherry, I do think that'll be a big selling point. And, we already have a lot of appreciation for it over there in the small markets that we're in, primarily Copenhagen. Like, there's a little bit of excitement and fervor for it, and you see it on back bars and on cocktail menus because it is just so different. It's not another bourbon from America. It's not another rye. Like, it's something distinctive and different. So yeah, I think that sets it apart.
And speaking of distinctive and different, Kansas City whiskey, just like Tennessee whiskey, has the official designation gone through to declare Kansas City whiskey its own?
Well, that's a
segment.
That's another kind of step in the process. So it's legally approved by the federal government. So the TTB gave us permission to classify it as Kansas City whiskey because our recipe is unique and it doesn't fit into any other category. So they allowed us to call it Kansas City whiskey. But the TTB is really only there to kind of make sure that you're following whatever rules are set forth and you're not doing anything too crazy, and they're there to collect your taxes, right? As far as designating the actual, guardrails around quality production measures of what actually defines Kansas City whiskey, that has to happen at the state level. And that's the same process that Tennessee went through. So it would have been approved federally first. Tennessee says to the TTB, hey, this isn't bourbon, even though it looks like it's bourbon. It's not bourbon. It's Tennessee whiskey. And the federal government says, okay, that's fine. But in order for them to define it and say, here's what you can do and what you can't do, that has to happen in Tennessee. Same thing with us. So the next step for us is to get legislation passed in the state of Missouri that puts those parameters around what you can and can't do in Kansas City whiskey.
So going back to all these countries you're in and trying to get to, if you ever need an ambassador to go over there, me and Randy are happy to take off some time and tell them how good.
Hey man, the way I see it, you're all ambassadors already. All of our employees and their families and extended families and friends and communities, they're all our ambassadors. Like I encourage them, go out there if you like us and support us. Like, just ask for it. When you go to bars, ask for it, and don't even say, hey, do you have Riegars? Just confidently order it. Say, I'll have a Riegars on the rocks.
Have it like, oh, what?
Right?
Like, how dare you not have this?
Make the bartender go, why have I never heard of this? I need to have it.
Heard of this delicious stuff.
And I want to, something just dawned on me. I know that when you opened up the shop, there were some challenges legally that you had to explain the law to the powers that be that said, no, I can open up a cigar lounge in Kansas City.
Yeah.
You had to go to TTB and say, no, we can add sherry to whiskey and still call it whiskey.
Yeah, they didn't know about their own law. Yeah. So the law that we unearthed that actually, said, yes, you can add sherry, was written in 1934, right on the heels of the repeal of Prohibition. Prohibition was repealed in 1933, and that's when the federal government laid out their kind of general outlines for all whiskey or, spirit production labeling in the U.S., and then it's been amended many, 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 many times over the years. But in those initial, general descriptions of what you can and can't do in those laws, they specifically point out the historic, established, traditional use of sherry in American whiskey. And when I saw that, it blew my mind to think there's an established traditional use of sherry in American whiskey. And this was written in 1934, right after Prohibition was repealed. So it must have been established prior to that, right? But they didn't know. Yeah. So the TTB wasn't aware of it. We had to show them that law. We had to point out, look, right there. And they were like, oh, guess so. Yes, you can. So that was pretty interesting to see that it's been so lost to history that even the federal government today didn't know about it.
Have you come across some of the pre-prohibition bottles of Rieger
Yeah.
And have you been able to compare today's Rieger to then? I mean, there's going to be definitely differences because it's 100 years old.
Yeah.
But
it's interesting. So most of the bottles that we have from back then are empty.
Okay.
Most of them don't even have a label. It's really, really hard to come across one where the label has actually been, somehow, preserved. It's even less rare to come across one that's got any liquid in it. But we do have two. We have two bottles that have liquid in it. And I have tasted them, and it's really interesting. Like I do believe that we were making this style of whiskey back then. We were adding sherry. The flavor was pretty good.
Yeah.
Considering you're drinking a whiskey that's more than 100 years old.
Yeah.
Maybe a lot more than 120 years old. Right. It was actually pretty good. But I'm still looking we're always still learning more and looking for more information, still finding new things.
Yeah.
The most recent addition to our historic exhibit was the beautiful ornate cash register from the National Cash Register Company back in the early 1900s that was custom built for J. Rieger and Company down in the West Bottoms.
Oh, wow.
Like somebody had it and found it. And the way we know it's ours is like if you take the drawer out, underneath there's a little tag. It says, built specifically for J. Rieger and Company with the date and the address and everything. That's cool. It was in 1910, I think.
Oh my goodness.
And now it's on display at our distillery. It's really cool. It's one of the big, beautiful old like gold ornate cash registers, So we keep coming across more. And I
didn't realize that. I thought that was just y'all just had it probably in storage somewhere.
No, somebody literally walked into the distillery one day, and that's the thing. Like back in the beginning, I had to seek out all this stuff, like scour eBay, and I would literally go to estate sales and antique malls all over the Midwest.
Sounds like what I do.
And collect bottles and find them. I would find a lot of them initially. Now they're harder to find. And the people that do have them, because now we're known again, think that they're worth a lot more money than they actually are. But now that we've got that distillery there and we've got that historic exhibit, now a lot of it just comes to us, which is kind of cool.
That's nice. Yeah.
So let's talk about the awards that Rieger has gotten.
Oh yeah.
We gotta get it out there.
This
you guys just got a new bourbon, right?
We've got a lot this year. We've had a big year when it comes to accolades and recognition. And it's something that, I have to preface with, it's not something that we ever set out to do, was to like just, collect medals. If you want to, as a small craft distiller or whatever, if you want to just collect medals and use that as your marketing tactic, that you can. I mean, there's now a ton of them out there. I mean, I feel like I get, solicited every day from some new competition that's, promising all this kind of stuff. So it kind of waters down how much it actually means, to win those awards to some extent. So we never entered any.
Yeah.
We wanted to build our brand on quality and telling our story. We wanted to put a good product out there, really good whiskey, make good cocktails, and share a really cool story with people and connect with people that way. So we didn't chase accolades until this year. We're big enough, and with growing into a national brand and international brand, some of those things can have a lot of weight. So we selected at the beginning of this year 3 of the maybe most highly regarded and respected competitions out there, where you trust the judges, they're legit, that kind of thing. It's not just paying to get a medal or whatever. And that was the San Francisco Spirits Competition. I would say that's kind of like the Grammys, or the Oscars or whatever of the industry, like really industry driven, professionals. So San Francisco is like the biggest and the best. That's the big one, right? Then there's the Fred Minnick Ascot Awards, which I would say if San Francisco is the Grammys, then that one's the MTV Music Awards, right? Because he's got all the consumer,
it's like a lot cooler.
Well, he's got a consumer influencer type thing going on. He's got his YouTube channels, and he's got his newsletter that goes out every other day, and like he has a big consumer audience. And if he hypes your stuff up, like it can really be a game changer, right? Whereas even if you get, Best in Show at San Francisco, you can use it. Yeah. You can put those medals on your bottle, but you have to like really be the megaphone that gets out there. Fred, he can amplify your message for sure.
Yeah.
And then the third one we did was called the Ultimate Beverage Challenge in New York, run by Paul Packolt. And Paul Packolt is like considered maybe the best palate in the world when it comes to spirits. He's written multiple books, tasted more spirits than anybody in the world. And so that's kind of your nerdy, geeky kind of one. And so we entered all three, and we ended up just sweeping across the board.
That's awesome.
The straight bourbon, bottled and bond, got a double gold at San Francisco and was top 3 of all bourbons. More than 500 bourbons entered. It was top 3 up for best in show. So we didn't get best in show on that one, but we were top 3, double gold, and Nathan got to go to Las Vegas and wear a tuxedo for the awards ceremony.
I've only seen him in cargo shorts and khaki shirts,
boots and hats. Boots and shorts. Yeah. So we got that at San Francisco. We entered 4 products in San Francisco. And we got 2 double golds and 2 golds. So Kansas City whiskey, the rye, and the gin got a double gold at San Francisco. So we just clean sweep of that one. And then Fred Minnick, golds across the board, but the Kansas City whiskey was entered into the American whiskey category. And it's sort of a catch-all for anything that's not straight bourbon or straight rye. And he said this year was the largest category of anything entered. And I think that's interesting because what it tells me is that there's a ton of innovation going on right now. There's a lot of new products coming out. People are experimenting. They're saying, I don't want to make another bourbon. Let's try this other thing. And Kansas City whiskey, and this is all blind. All the judges do all of this blind. They have no idea what they're tasting. So there's no way for them to be influenced. Kansas City whiskey was named number 1 overall best American whiskey.
Wow.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Man, that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that you can put this on your bottle too. The Shop Cigar Lounge, you have been nominated and won the best bourbon and whiskey in here too.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Are you going to give me a medal for that?
I can give you a medal, cigar, whatever you want.
A golden cigar cutter.
Oh, that's awesome.
That could be your medal, your trophy.
And maybe we can get a cigar blend in there with the Riegar and come
all for it
and collaborate.
Yeah.
Ooh, good. I'm just thinking out loud. Sorry. So I guess before we wrap this up, I do want to ask, if you can go back in time, what would you tell yourself now that you know of like everything that you've done?
What would I tell myself? What would I do differently, or
anything? What would you do differently? What would you tell yourself? Like, stay the course, do the right thing. I mean, anything.
Yeah, I would, I guess there is one thing that immediately pops into my head, but I don't want it to sound like I really have any regrets, because I don't necessarily think I do. I mean, everything is it's so wild, like how, where we have come, and how far we've come in such a short amount of time. It's crazy, and it makes me so proud of, our team. And I love Kansas City so much, and to be a part of that, to now be a part of Kansas City's history with this is just immensely special. But if there's one thing, it would be buy the Rieger Hotel. The only reason that the Rieger restaurant and Manifesto are no longer is because we did not own that hotel.
Yeah.
I was a tenant. I had a lease, and that's when we end up losing it. But I think if we owned the hotel, if we owned that building, I think that would just be the cherry on top.
Yeah. Maybe we can try to bring it back somehow, some way.
One day.
There's a couple of buildings open, so we'll have Ryan look at them. Yeah. Hey, man, I really do appreciate you coming on. This has been awesome, especially hearing your story, getting to know about the products. This legit is like the best Kansas City whiskey and one of the best whiskeys around. I mean,
well, thank you.
Sorry about all the other ones, but Rieger's top of my list. Shout outs to any of your stuff if you want. Go ahead, man.
Yeah, I mean, so today, I love that you invited me on your YouTube channel. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I saw at the very beginning, you're like, hit that like and subscribe button. I keep getting reminded by our team to do that. So we have our own YouTube channel now, which we just started this year. So now we're like really putting a little bit of muscle behind, our own marketing efforts. And so establishing these types of things. So we have a YouTube channel. I have a regular show called Barely Enough. It airs tonight, or October 30th. So, but once a month we do that show. It's live, so you can kind of interact, ask questions, that kind of thing. Sometimes
distillery.
We do it at the distillery. We shoot it out of the Hey Hey Club.
That's awesome.
Behind the bar. Sometimes it's just me kind of talking at the camera, talking to the audience, and maybe walking through a tasting or something like that. Sometimes I have guests, like I've had Fred as a guest on there, Souther Teague. Sometimes Nathan and I kind of bounce back and forth and have fun with it. But there's that show. We have multiple other shows on our YouTube channel as well. So I would say, check us out on there. I think there's always something fun. It's really good production value. We've got a really great young videographer that's kind of spearheading that for us. And, come down to the distillery. I mean, it is impossible for me to fully explain and get the point across about how special and unique the experience is, to come see us without you just got to see it.
You guys have beautiful bars, great food, and they have a slide that you get to go down, and I think that was like the coolest part. And I think another cool thing about the distillery, like even before you start it, you have to get the video, you get the history, and a lot of people don't do that, and I love that.
Well, so 7 days a week, man. Like we do tours 7 days a week, and once we moved into that building, and our story just keeps growing with all these layers. There's still so much there. We knew we had to, in order to kind of have longevity for that, built our historic exhibit, a museum, and then we tried to condense our story into about a 9-minute or so video, but it's really well done and it's fun.
Yeah.
And then you get to walk through the production floor, the barrel rick house, and then do a tasting at the end.
Yeah.
Something we haven't mentioned yet are the conference rooms. If you're a business owner, you want to find a different place to meet. I've been in both conference rooms. You've got one in the rick house, right?
Yeah, we have a really beautiful private dining room inside our rick house, surrounded by barrels.
It's amazing.
Multiple event spaces. Like we can, take private parties for as small as 8 up to, several hundred, if not, if you want to buy out the whole distillery.
Mm-hmm. And then you also just don't have whiskey and bourbon too. You have gin, vodka. What is it? The Cafe Amaro.
Yeah, the gin, the vodka, and the Cafe Amaro kind of round out our core. Whiskeys are what probably constitute about 50% of our total business. But vodka, gin, the Cafe Amaro are very important parts of our brand.
Cafe Amaro is great in a coffee.
Wonderful, yeah. Woo. And then we've recently introduced some things like the RTD cocktails, canned cocktails for KU, and we're going to have some additions to that down the line as well.
Is there going to be an old-fashioned RTD?
We actually do have one right now. You can buy it you can buy it at the distillery. We don't distribute those outside of the distillery, but you can buy the bottled cocktails like the old-fashioned horse feather.
I have one of those and smoking too.
Yeah.
I've got to get over
and I'm just like holding on to it.
They're amazing. Gosh,
I know I could just go down and probably buy it. But I just I don't want anyone to drink it. This is mine. Oh, thanks, Ryan. Thank you guys for tuning in. This is Strawberry Hill Podcast. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell like he said. Thank you guys for joining in. I'll see you next week.
Goodbye, everybody.